Welcome in, everybody, and welcome to the Marshall Experience. Tonight, we are going to be covering the NFC North. And last couple of weeks, we've been covering the by division, but fantasy outlook of the division by team. We're going to continue that this week with the NFC North. If you have missed some prior episodes, we've already covered the NFC East, the AFC East, and I believe that's it. Just two weeks so far that we've done the divisions. So if your team is in that division or you just missed out on that episode, make sure you guys go check that out. Excuse me. And again, it's all fantasy related, so it has nothing to do with predictions of how the season's going to go, but it does have the predictions of the fantasy numbers that we predict come from each team. Again, tonight we are going to be covering the NFC North. But before we get into that, obviously we talk about our sponsors and who we're powered by. We're powered by the Sports Lounge Media. Guys, if you haven't checked them out already, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and of course TikTok, go check them out. They're always sharing things daily. And if you're in the sports world and it's just if you enjoy sports, it's a great place to be a part of. So many different avenues come from so many different personalities, and couldn't ask for a better group. So again, go check them out, the Sports Lounge Media, and of course our sponsors, the Mogul brand and the Diamond Collection. Guys, we're going to get right into it tonight. Again, these division ones have been a little lengthy, so bear with us. And if you guys leave mid time and just finish the episode later or finish it at a later time, there's no harm, no foul. But again, we'll get right into it for the NFC North. We're going to start off with the Lions. The Lions combined for a franchise best 15-2 regular season record. They had the NFL's highest point differential at 222. This was a damn good team, widely considered the favorite in the NFC at one point, right? And it didn't end up that way. 5 turnovers and an injury-ravaged defense really led to a 45-31 loss to the Commanders in the playoffs, right? On their quest to their first ever Super Bowl. While the ending was painful, that really shouldn't distract us from the fact that last year's Lions were, a force to be reckoned with. Okay. Detroit Lions last year were first in points per game at 33. EPA per drop back, third, EPA per rush in the run game, and they were ranked 5th. And then their defense was 7th against points against. So all around, it's really a solid team. They had a great year. Again, it kind of came down to injuries and just running out of gas. So, however, unfortunate top of the food chain problems are now impacting Detroit, right? Coordinators Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn take their talents to Chicago and to New York. Good news, the bulk of the roster key contributors remained intact, right? And just a bit better luck from the injury gods, could make this season's edition of the Lions better than ever, right? If we sprinkle a little fairy dust and hope for the best of health. But again, today we're going to basically go over how we view these positions for the Detroit Lions. So how much upside does Jared Goff really have in fantasy football land? Okay. Goff is fresh off his best regular season ever, based on pretty much any efficiency stats you look at. Okay. The version was even better than the guy that we saw put up all kinds of numbers alongside Sean McVay back when he was with the Rams. Okay. 4,629 yards and 37 touchdowns, 38 if you include his touchdown catch. We're good enough for quarterback 7 in fantasy points per game. Here's the only problem with assuming a high-end encore in 2025. Okay, this Lions offense, like Goff, has been awesome the last 3 years. But pocket passers who run as little as the 30-year-old franchise quarterback need to be almost perfect through the air in order to contend with the dual threat quarterbacks in the position that, in the top 5. Okay. Consider that just 2% of Goff's fantasy points came from rushing production last year. He's not a runner, guys. The only other quarterbacks under 5% would be Tua, Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins, which was 0%. That's kind of crazy. I wrote that down. And then Joe Flacco, 2%. Okay. Bottom line is, it's not like many expect Goff to be drastically, fall off or anything. That's not what I'm getting at tonight. It's just that Goff's quarterback 13 price tag, okay, in early fantasy drafts is a steep price to pay when similar status-esque archetypes, with at least some proven high-end fantasy production, say, per se, CJ Stroud, Tua, Stafford. I think they're available even in multiple rounds later on average. So, this isn't somebody that I'm chasing. Okay. Does Jahmyr Gibbs deserve to be the running back 1 in fantasy? Well, Gibbs' combination of dominance as a rusher and receiver is, largely unmatched at the position. We can be honest about that. The rising third-year talent ceiling is admittedly a bit capped, okay, as David Montgomery is healthy, right, because they do have that dual-back system. But even then, the efficiency and the big play ability are too great to really care all that much, okay? Overall, Gibbs worked as the running back 5 in PPR points per game at 18.7 in weeks 1 through 15 with a healthy David Montgomery. Okay. The running back 1 in weeks 16 to 18 when Montgomery was out. Okay. He was the undisputed lead back. He had averaged 32 fantasy points per game those 3 weeks. I remember when people back in August were really worried about his hamstring injury and how lingering it was going to be, and that didn't really pan out either. So, and what about Monty? The man's been a model of consistency, right? When it comes to beating his affordable ADP ever since joining the Lions back in 2023, I believe. In 2023, he was running back 15 in points per game, and he was a running back 31 in the preseason. Okay, so he almost doubled his ADP. Last season, he was running back 16 in points per game with a preseason ADP of 21. So, 5 spots better, but it's like I say it all the time. If they beat their ADP, it's a valuable pick for you. It's what it boils down to. Okay. Even the pass game usage is a bit underrated. Did you know that Montgomery, who caught 36 passes last year, scored more points per game as a receiver, okay, than Saquon, Josh Jacobs, James Cook, and Bucky Irvin barely out-edged him. Okay, this is the company he is, and when it comes to the receiving game. So Montgomery's not a slouch either. He's just not getting the volume that Gibbs is getting. Okay, so the bottom line is the only thing preventing Gibbs from being the running back 1 fantasy is the reality that fellow, flat out ultra talented, but Saquon and Bijan, don't have that Sonic and Knuckles, right? They don't have that 2-back system to really fight with. They don't have that to deal with. So I think that is what is preventing him more so. You can add Derrick Henry into that conversation. But Jahmyr Gibbs has that David Montgomery fighting into his carries, and I think that is what is preventing him from coming over that hump and being that running back 1 in all fantasy. Gibbs is my sixth ranked overall player and is someone I'm comfortable taking ahead of wide receivers not named Chase, Jefferson, and Lamb. Let's be honest about it. Okay. As for Monty, he continues to look like a rock solid value at his low end running back 2, right? Price tag. Although it's tough to outrank him ahead of guys like Alvin Kamara, Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, right? We've talked about James Conner and his workload. It comes down to the workload. If you give them more opportunities, they have more opportunities to produce points, okay? Don't underrate Montgomery's own potential for fireworks, should Gibbs, that hamstring injury come back or anything like that. He racked up 59 combined carries and targets for 4 touchdowns in only 2 games without Gibbs in 2023. So, those weeks were running back 2 and running back 5 finishes. So, even without, if Gibbs were to go down, Montgomery's a great handcuff to have, sitting on the bench. So how often does one team produce multiple top 24 fantasy wide receivers? Okay. Sun God averaged more EPA per target and posted the position's highest catch rate over expected among all wide receivers with at least 65 targets last season. Okay, that's according to Next Gen Stats. The wide receiver 10, wide receiver 4, and wide receiver 4 finishes in points per game over the last 3 seasons. Okay, St. Brown is locked in as really a top 8 in wide receiver in fantasy. I know St. Brown is locked in top 8 wide receiver in fantasy. We all know, right? St. Brown, again, I will say it, is a locked top 8 in fantasy. I can't reiterate it enough. The better question is just what we can expect from Jameson Williams following his breakout 2024 campaign. Little over 1,000 yards in total yards, 8 scores in just 15 games, led to 14.2 points per contest. That was good for a wide receiver 24 status. Okay, so that's where we get into how often does this happen? 2 wide receivers in the top 24. Okay, the fact that Williams accomplished all of this on just 91 targets is, well, it's pretty impressive. Only A.J. Brown, Mike Williams, and George Kittle have managed to crack the century mark with fewer pass game opportunities since targets have been tracked in 1992. So, again, great company. That was Mike Williams back when he was in his prime in a Charger uniform. The team's relative lack of additional target competition at wide receivers should continue to result in St. Brown and Williams receiving the lion's share of the work. No pun intended. This brings us to the key question: just how often does this multiple top 24 wide receivers in the same season? More than you think. Actually, the answer is, and specifically an average of 5 teams per season have enabled multiple top 24 wide receivers in PPR points per game over the last decade of action. Okay, shout out 2018 Rams and the 2020 Buccaneers as the only teams with 3. Okay. Which would be like, you see Godwin and Evans. The Rams was, if I remember correctly, Cup was a big increment of that. But I think that was when Nakua was coming on the scene. Maybe a little after that. But listen, the bottom line, St. Brown continues to have one of the highest floors at the position thanks to his chemistry with Goff and an elite scoring offense, more than willing to flow its passing game through him, right? We've seen that with double-digit targets several times throughout the season. Barring a complete collapse without the help of Ben Johnson, he should once again return top 10 production at the position. It's hard to argue with a profile like that in round one in drafts of most shapes and sizes, okay? As for Williams, his early wide receiver 27 price tag seems about right for his boomer bust wide receiver 3 profile. If things go as swimmingly as 2024 did, another borderline wide receiver 2 finish is okay to be on the table. Just realize expecting too big of a boom for the hopeful number 2 target in this run-first offense might be wishful thinking, okay? I'm more of a fan of a clear-cut number 1 wide receivers like Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf, Zay Flowers, Calvin Ridley, who are at similar cost with Jameson Williams, okay? Don't expect any other Detroit wide receivers to really garner any fantasy relevance without an injury or suspension next year. With that said, shout out Tim Patrick holding down the number 3 job last year after back-to-back brutal summer season. Just in training camp, blows out his knee twice. So, it was great to see Tim Patrick producing on the football field. So, shout out to him. So next is Sam Laporta a good bet for a post-hype bounce back? Okay. Last year was a disappointment for Laporta, mostly just relative to his preseason fantasy hype. Okay, he was the second, typically was the first tight end off the board in drafts last year, and averaging. After taking over Travis Kelce's number 1 spot last year, he took it as a rookie. So, he was the guy to draft last year. He was the number 1 tight end to take it off. So, unfortunately, Laporta failed to reciprocate that magic, for the vast majority of last season. Strong end to the year kind of helped him post a respectable tight end 9 finish in points per game. It's likely that many of the fantasy managers who drafted the Iowa product, in the first place, were no longer in a position to overly benefit from the performance. Okay, Laporta's points per game last year, weeks 1 through 7, he was tight end 22. Weeks 8 through 14, but was a tight end 11. Was a lot better. But the weeks 15 to the playoffs, he was 16 points per game at tight end 2. So he really turned it on last year at the end. Early season hamstring and ankle injuries didn't help matters. Laporta ultimately wound up averaging just 5.2 targets per game after going for 7.1 as a rookie. So that was a big deal. Also getting 2 less targets per game at the year after. However, it might behoove fantasy managers, right? Dynasty faithfuls in particular, to not freak out too much. Okay, I don't think you should be shipping him off for the highest price. We're still talking about the 6th best tight end ever in points per game during their first 2 seasons. Okay, the guy's having a heck of a start of a year. He just had a bad start last year. But the bottom line is Laporta is all for, he's my consensus ranked tight end number 4. Okay. Although the big 3 options at the positions are all going inside what I would say maybe possibly a top 40, top 45. Laporta is going as the 58th, according to Fantasy Life, overall player off the board. This disparity reflects the drop-off. I would not take him above guys, obviously, like Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle. But after that, he definitely draws my interest above everyone else at the position, okay? Nobody needs more than one hand to really count the number of tight ends that you'd rather have in fantasy land this year, right? But the 3, the cost between Laporta and the guys higher, like Evan Ingram and David Njoku, has usually resulted in me passing on Laporta and going more towards an Evan Ingram or David Njoku. David Njoku. They're going to require the same target volume. I think David has a great year, and then Evan Ingram, I think, is going to be a target machine for Bo Nix in Denver, and we've talked about both of those guys. So what has been the best offensive line in football over the last few years? It's a lot of people say Philly, a lot of people say the Lions. In pass blocking, the Lions have a great argument. Okay, we'll start there. In pass blocking, the Lions have allowed the 9th longest average time to pressure. Okay, 2.56 seconds. And the 10th lowest pressure rate overall, which is 32%. This is in the last 3 seasons. In run blocking, the Lions running backs have averaged 1.7 yards before contact per carry in that span. Okay, this is impressive considering the result of the usual top teams on this list. Again, Eagles, Ravens, Bills benefit from the gravity of their respective dual threat quarterbacks, right? Something Mr. Goff obviously does not offer. Overall, we looked this up on PFF, have consistently provided, favorable reports on the Lions' end of season ranking, right? 2022, they were 8th. 2023, they jumped up to 2nd. And 2024, they were 4th. Don't expect too much really to change from a group with 4 of the 5 starters. So I expect them to, be a top 5 O-line again. So what is the prediction for the Detroit Lions for 2025? It's curious that the Lions' 10.5 win total places them a tier below, teams like the Bills, Eagles, Chiefs, and Ravens. They're the only teams sitting at 11.5. So while the first place schedule isn't obviously going to be ideal for them, more success on offense and just a bit better maybe injury luck on defense should lead to, more high-end results. Okay, so give me the over on 10.5. I can go 11 or 12 wins for Detroit this year. But my bold fantasy prediction is that both Gibbs and Montgomery this year managed to turn in top 12 seasons in half PPR leagues points per game. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about is the Minnesota Vikings. Okay. Things were going rather awesome for the Vikings during the first, 17 weeks of 2024, right? 14-2 start. Then there was the Week 18 winner-take-all showdown with the Lions for both the NFC North and the conference's number 1 seed, right? The Vikings got smacked 31-9. Sadly, things only got worse the following week when, the trip to Los Angeles resulted in another 3-score beatdown at the hands of the Rams. The Vikings went from a 122 over point differential during the first 89% of their season to a minus 40 disparity during their most 2 important weeks. I'm not a Viking fan, and that still hurt me to write down. Glass half full view is that this is still one of 6 squads to post a top 10 scoring offense and defense. They were 9th in points per game and 5th in points per against. So, of course, things will look a little bit different on the former side of the ball in 2025 now that, JJ McCarthy will be taking over for Sam Darnold under center. Throw in multiple big dollar and or early investments into both the offensive and defensive lines, and you have a team seemingly ready to compete to be one of the best squads in the league. So let's dive into this. Let's dive into the Minnesota Vikings. Is JJ McCarthy poised to be Kevin O'Connell's next great fantasy quarterback? Okay, I am a very big Kevin O'Connell advocate. Kevin O'Connell legitimately is the quarterback whisperer, as they like to say. He does wonders, and I think that's a lot why Sam Darnold succeeded the way he is. And when he doesn't succeed as well in Seattle, that'll be proven. But he's had Kirk Cousins at his best in his career. Kirk Cousins leaves and he's falls off the face of the earth. So I'm a big Kevin O'Connell guy, and let's take a quick trip down memory lane. Okay, again, Kirk Cousins sets a new career high in 2022, 4,500 passing yards, and finishes as quarterback 12 in fantasy points per game. In 2023, Cousins works as quarterback 6 before tearing his Achilles. Then his replacement, Joshua Dobbs, ripped off 3 top 9 finishes before the wheels fell off. Okay, after that, Nick Mullins even posted a quarterback 14, quarterback 11, and quarterback 5, guys, finishes in his only 3 starts. Now, 2024, long considered a monster bust, right? Sam Darnold accounts for 36 touchdowns on his way to working as the quarterback 9 in fantasy points per game. Okay, well, not too shabby. Obviously, having one of the NFL's best wide receiver duos, in my opinion, in Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and alongside TJ Hawkinson, it does make life easier for quarterbacks of all shapes and sizes. So what happens when this group is met with a legit blue chip prospect in the form of the 10th overall pick? Okay. The point about JJ McCarthy's athleticism could wind up being a solid resource in fantasy land. While McCarthy only averaged 4.2 fantasy points per game from rushing in his last 2 collegiate seasons, okay, his efficiency on those scrambles, though, which was 9.3 yards per run, were actually better than Caleb Williams, Jalen Milroe, and Drake May. Okay, so yes, betting heavily on McCarthy before he's played a regular season snap does carry some risk. Also, yes, some of the draft community's sharpest analysts, in my opinion, believe that McCarthy would have been the first quarterback off the board in this year's draft ahead of Cam Ward and company. Okay, throw that sort of talent inside an offense that has already made a habit of supplying a top-tier supporting cast, and, well, Sam Darnold. So, bottom line, I'm higher on McCarthy than, most people that I've seen. I think that I have him ranked as my quarterback 17. I'm buying into the youth. I'm buying into the talent, and most of all, the offensive environment over guys like, in my opinion, now this is dynasty-wise. Redraft, this might be a little rough. But dynasty-wise, I'm taking him over guys like Dak, CJ, Tua, and among others. So, in redraft, I might take Dak and CJ over him. But I would be interested to take him over Tua for sure. I get this isn't exactly the biggest endorsement in the world, right? Considering that it's just mid-tier, quarterback 2 status. But just realize he's in the same tier as guys like Herbert, May, Love, and Lawrence, and that's the sort of upside that we could be looking at here. Okay, so our drafters underestimating Aaron Jones' upside as the lead back. We talked about Aaron Jones a couple of weeks ago. Aaron parlayed plenty of production as the rusher last year, getting over 250 carries, over 1,100 yards and 5 scores. And as a receiver as well, 51 catches for 2 more scores. Into a running back 20 finish in points per game in his first year wearing purple. So those 306 touches were the most of his career. And yet it's tough to look at Jones' advanced numbers from last season and conclude that he was anything close to elite. The Vikings' 21st ranked offensive line in rush yards before contact, per carry didn't help matters. Just realize that Jones ranked 17th or worse in missed tackles, force per carry, explosive rush rate, yards after contact, and successful rush rate among all 31 qualified running backs. So he's about mid-tier, guys. I mean, it's middle of the pack. 31 years old next December. The history of running backs putting forward running back one caliber seasons of fantasy lands at this age, it's not really existent. Now, this doesn't mean that Jones can't return usable fantasy value in the right environment, right? Just realize it's almost a certainty that we've seen the best ball of his career. Okay, so this brings us to the Vikings, offseason edition, the ex-49er Jordan Mason, who made the absolute most out of his opportunities as the rusher with Christian McCaffrey banged up last season, right? Seriously, though, only Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley had more rushing yards than Mason during the first 8 weeks of 2024. And the guy was eating. He's third in next-gen stats rushing yards. Over expected per carry, Mason finds out himself in elite company when looking at some of his advanced rushing metrics, okay? The midseason AC joint sprain and the high ankle sprain, I think it was in December, prevented Mason from putting forward an encore during the second half of the season. Okay, either way, kudos to Jordan Mason for the making of this and for the most of his opportunities and putting some pretty great plays on film, So the team's shuffling on the offensive line isn't guaranteed to yield better results. But at least they're trying in the form of, they got Will Fries on a 5-year deal, Ryan Kelly at center, as well as a first-round pick in Donovan Jackson. So now, this stands as the league's fourth most expensive group of the big men in terms of $20-25. So the bottom line here is O'Connell has openly spoken, okay, about how getting Jones back into more of a 1A, 1B backfield structure can bring out the best of his 8-year career. Yet even a little reduction in touches leaves plenty of room for Jones to produce some fireworks at running back 28. I think that his ADP is respectable at this point. I think he's a great zero running back target for managers prioritizing wide receivers and an elite quarterback or tight end at the top of the draft. Okay. Now, as for Mason, it's possible he carves out some standalone value if given double-digit touches per game and a goal line role, something Kevin O'Connell has already hinted at, right? Now his running back 34 ADP in Mason is a bit pricey, I think. I think he's on like a flex level role. What if it doesn't come to fruition? I think there's more pure handcuffs like Trey Benson, Ray Davis, Tyler Algier for the Falcons, and they're quite a bit cheaper as well. But still, like those other backs, Mason would instantly be in a weekly upside running back 2 conversation should his team starter miss any game action. And we've talked about Aaron Jones, and it seems that he does miss a few games every now and then, or miss some time during the game, I should say. Should both Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison be prioritized in fantasy drafts of all shapes and sizes? Okay, we have Justin Jefferson at wide receiver 2 and Jordan Addison at wide receiver 35. We won't spend much time on the Jetta's part of the equation. Short answer is yes, the wide receiver 2 in career points per game ever is locked in as Kevin O'Connell's undisputed number 1 pass game option, right? A role which has yielded a 17-game average of 170 targets. It's just below 10 targets per game, guys. He's the 4th overall player in the fantasy life rankings, and someone who could even be due for some positive regression of sorts, considering nobody racked up more defensive pass interference yards last season than Justin Jefferson. Now, that brings us to Addison. Overcame in August and September ankle injuries to improve upon his already stellar rookie campaign, in my opinion. His nose for the end zone has truly been amazing. Addison's 19 receiving touchdowns are tied for the 5th most during the first 2 seasons of their career since 1998. So, yeah, that's some pretty special company. Naturally, this has led to plenty of booms in fantasy land. Okay, want to hear the sort of cool cut-off off-season stat that you can take a lone fantasy analysis from 6 to midnight in a hurry? Last season, Addison scored the 5th most points per game of any wide receiver during weeks 9 through 17, just behind Justin Jefferson. Okay, so that means from week 9 to week 17, Justin Jefferson was number 4 and Addison was number 5. That doesn't scare you. I don't know what does. Whether it's crispy double moves from Jordan Addison, I love his yards after catch. But I think the guy's made a lot of impressive plays during his. His guy's only 22, as a matter of fact. In that, now on the flip side of that, I do think that Addison's target ceiling will always be a bit capped while playing, the Robin to Justin Jefferson's Batman. I think that, Fantasy Life had their targets respectively earning 145 for Justin Jefferson and 94 for Addison. I think that's respectable. There's still potential for Addison to face suspension. We have to remember this, stemming from last July's DUI charge. So there's literally, his name is Drew Davenport. He is the fantasy football legal expert, okay, and actual lawyer, for fantasy football. But he believes that about a 1 to 2 game suspension is firmly in play for this season. But then again, legal systems can move quite slowly at times, right, in the NFL, as we've seen. So a prolonged trial could ultimately lead to another push to next year. So just pay attention to that. Addison is the reigning wide receiver 30 and wide receiver 23 in points per game. He remains a good bet to supply a wide receiver 3 upside if he's on the field, right? But the bottom line is draft Jefferson as a top 5 fantasy asset. In my opinion, with all the confidence in the world. While Addison is firmly in the mid-tier wide receiver 3 conversation and someone I prefer over less proven options with the similar ADPs like Rome Odunze, Ricky Pearsall, and Matthew Golden, I would much prefer a Jordan Addison who's proven himself. But if we've learned one thing from the Kevin O'Connell experience over the past 3 seasons, is to trust the upside of this passing game. Okay. Will T.J. Hawkinson post elite numbers an extra year removed from a knee injury? Okay. I do have him as the tight end 5 right now. The long-time tight end didn't really suit up until week 9 last season and didn't score his first touchdown until the Vikings wild card loss to the Rams, right? Throw in a 4-year low in receiving yards per game at 45.5, which was not like TJ, and 8.7 points per contest, which was tight end 17. It's fair to wonder exactly how much upside the soon-to-be 28-year-old still has. Then again, we are just one singular season removed from Hockenson working as the tight end 2 in points per game at 14.6. Now, those numbers are a bit inflated, from Jefferson missing essentially 8 games during the middle of that season. But here's Hawkinson's numbers in 2023 with and without Justin Jefferson. Per-game with Jefferson with 7 games, he averages 7 targets for 53 yards and about 13 points per game. Now, without on 8 games, he averages almost 10 targets a game, 75 yards, and just above 16 points per game. So, look, 12.8 points per game from a tight end is still a solid number. It would have been good for tight end 6 status in each of the past 2 years, okay? That's good. Maybe not the sort of non-injury induced ceiling we're chasing too early in the drafts, but the bottom line is the tight end 5 in early ADP. I've found myself usually going after top 6 quarterbacks, top 30 running backs, or top 48 wide receivers instead of going hard in the paint for a TJ Hockenson at his price, okay? There's better ones after the fact. Like I said, I've talked about David Njoku tonight, Evan Ingram. We've talked about a few that could definitely be some late round gems there. Now, let's talk about Brian Flores for a minute. I think that this guy deserved a head coaching job next year. I think he eventually will get one. But what makes Brian Flores' defensive scheme so unique? Okay, so for the defensive leagues, right? Mostly his tendency to blitz like an absolute madman. Flores is basically like, Coach Bill Yost from Remember the Titans when he declares his intention to blitz all night. I mean, it's how I picture it. Flores' blitz rate on dropbacks per year. Okay, since 2019 to 2024, I'm going to go in order. 10th, 6th, 2nd, 1st, the last 2 years. So he's gotten better every year, but now he's bringing the whole house. The last 2 years have been 49.5% and 38.6%, both first. So that strategy's, certainly worked. The Vikings ranked 9th in pressure rate over the past 2 seasons and improved their scoring defense from 13th to 5th. Okay, so what is the prediction for the Minnesota Vikings for 2025? The Vikings, have a modest 8.5 win total. And honestly, it's my favorite over that I've probably come across so far. Kevin O'Connell has posted 13, 7, and 14 wins during his 3 seasons leading this squad. And now might have just found his best quarterback yet. Let's be honest about it. He's had Kirk Cousins, he's had Joshua Dobbs, and Sam Darnold. JJ McCarthy has the potential to be the best out of that group. Throw in what sure looks like an improved defensive line thanks to the presence of Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave. That's a for sure bet for me. I can't get that any more clear. And for my bold fantasy related call, I'm going to say Jordan Mason will return to legit running back 1 production. So I believe that he could be a guy that you draft to be a starter during his brief stint, hopefully for Aaron Jones, as the team's lead back when pushed back into action. So I think that Jordan Mason is going to be an absolute steal this year, guys. Book that. Next team we're going to talk about here is the Green Bay Packers. The Mogul Podcast is trying to figure out what the big news is. You guys got to stick around. You guys got to stick around. If Love Island's more important, guess you find out when you finish the episode later. Right? People that stick around, we get the juicy stuff. The juicy stuff. All right, so on to the Green Bay Packers. The last season's edition of the Packers had a lot of good. From double-digit wins for the first time since 2021 to a plus 122 point differential, which was fifth best in the league. Matt LaFleur largely proved capable of winning against more squads than not, right around the league. Last year, they were 8th in points per game and 6th in points per game against. So those were solid numbers. But unfortunately, things got a bit more rough for Jordan Love and company when presented against the true high-end competition, okay? All 6 of their non-Week 18 losses, sorry, Bear fans, came against the Eagles, the Vikings, and Lions. 3 of the NFL's only 4 teams to join 14-plus games last season. Okay, Green Bay's off-season counter, well, let's be honest about it. I want to say a word, but I can't. But we're going to say they wanted their best off-season counter was to complain, right? To complain about and banning the tush push, okay? But, let's just push that to the side. But they poured more resources into the wide receiver room while adding, left guard Aaron Banks and corner Nate Hobbs on a 4-year deal, both the big dollar contracts and free agency. Throw in LaFleur's proven excellence as the 3rd best active head coach in terms of winning percentage. And it makes sense that his squad carries the 9th highest Super Bowl odds entering next season. They seem to always be there. I think he's a great coach, guys. Now, let's ask some questions. Let's answer some questions about these Green Bay Packers. Is Jordan Love a good or great fantasy quarterback? Okay. Right now, I have him at quarterback 15. Love's first full year as a starter in 2023 was really a tale of 2 halves. Okay. In weeks 1 through 8, this was one of the league's least accurate quarterbacks performing at an objectively mediocre level. But after that, we're talking about top 2 marks in EPA per dropback, completion percentage over expected, and PFF pass grade alike. Now, the result was a stunning 18.8 fantasy points per game, good enough for quarterback 5 finish. Now, too bad the sequel wasn't as good as the original. Love slipped to quarterback 17 status on the season and somehow was the quarterback 33 on a pregame basis from weeks 8 to 18. Now, reminder, there are only 32 NFL teams. Yet, the advanced numbers don't really paint the picture of a horde quarterback. Just one who didn't manage to stay quite as hot as he ended 2023. Right? Some of those numbers are really good. We're talking borderline elite marks in EPA per dropback, which is he's 9th, and yards per attempt, which is 5th. His continued ability to avoid sacks has only really been matched by Josh Allen during the last season and a half in percentage. So what happened to the fantasy points, though? It turned out that severely spraining your MCL in week 1 and then hurting your groin in week 8 doesn't exactly help out in the old rushing department, right? So Love's fantasy points per game when playing 65% of the snaps. 2023, he was rushing. He had 3 points added to rushing. This last year had almost less than a point in rushing. That 1.8 fantasy point difference from rushing might not seem like a lot, but just realize that Love would have been just a smidge off of quarterback 12 status behind Kyler Murray with the benefit of his previous rushing mobility. Okay, just that production. We're talking about only, 18 non-kneel downs all season. His scrambles were cut in half. ultimately a healthy version of Love should be plenty capable of, again, putting up quality numbers alongside one of the league's best play callers, in my opinion, and anyone's idea of a, top-tier supporting cast. Even if it'd be a lot cooler if one of these wide receivers could actually emerge as a legit alpha one of these days. More on that in a minute. But, the bottom line here is Love isn't that big of a rusher to begin with. But getting back into 2023 territory will help him separate from the true pocket passers of the world into the prolonged quarterback 2 tier. Okay? Now, he's my quarterback 15, just behind Justin Herbert and Drake May, but ahead of more stationary quarterbacks like Jared Goff and Tua Tagovailoa. I wouldn't say I've gone out of the way to consistently scoop him at current quarterback 17 ADP, but the depth of that tier has me pretty content to bypass the lower end quarterback 1 options if unable to draft a real elite option in the first few rounds. Okay. So what Josh Jacobs, was his 2024 workhorse role real or fugazi? Okay. I do have him as the running back 9. I think Jacobs proved his down 2023 was more of an issue of motivation and offensive environment more than anything. As his 1,671 total yards and 16 touchdowns as the engine, as the Packers of their Packers offense helped him finish as the running back 8 in points per game last year. But here's the thing. Jacobs ran as pure as anyone when it came to his backfield mates going down with injuries. Okay, A.J. Dillon, neck, missed the entire season. The third-rounder guy, Marshawn Lloyd, hamstring, ankle, only wound up playing 1 game all year. So why do Dillon and Lloyd matter when you have a great running back like Jacobs, right? Well, Matt LaFleur doesn't exactly have the cleanest history of always featuring one clear lead back. We're talking about a man who once split touches between Derrick Henry and Dion Lewis, for crying out loud. So, with all due respect to Dion Lewis. Now, that brings us to Lloyd, who displayed some explosive pass-catching ability during his time at the University of South Carolina, USC. And USC, it's not a given that Lloyd is the for sure next man up, even after Emmanuel Wilson, okay? Actually, Emmanuel Wilson did some good things as the running back 2 last year. Just realized that Green Bay used a 3rd-round pick on Lloyd for a reason, right? Before going ahead and largely ignoring the position throughout the entire offseason, okay? So I still think it's Lloyd's spot regardless. But the bottom line is Jacobs is a top 10 option at the position, and someone who is firmly in play at his affordable late round 2, early round 3 ADP. Even if I prefer more clear-cut workhorse backs, more like Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry, who don't have that second back to really come in and take his what could be his workload. Now, meanwhile, Lloyd is largely being ignored and is regularly available in the final round or 2 in most drafts. While we can't completely assume he'd inherit the bulk of Jacobs' work, should an injury arise, but that sentiment is true from basically any running back going this late in drafts. And Lloyd's plus draft capital, skill set, and the offensive environment, in my opinion, is a combo worth betting on. I think he joins Jalen Wright and Will Shipley as my favorite late round darts at the position. Okay, so who is the number 1 wide receiver in this ever crowded room? Right? I don't have a Green Bay wide receiver ranked above wide receiver 41, guys. I have Jayden Reed at 41, Matthew Golden at 46, Dobbs at 65, Wicks at 73, and Watson at 99. I have no idea what's going to happen here. Annoyed fantasy managers aren't the only ones feeling like this wide receiver room needs a jolt. Packers running back Josh Jacobs did state in early February, I think he need a guy that's proven to be a wide receiver one already. And I couldn't agree more. But for good reason. So no group of wide receivers have had more total drops than the Packers, 25. And their drop rate, it's just 8.4%, also led the league. The top of the leaderboard in drop rate featured Datavion Wicks at 17 and Jayden Reed at 15.4. Former guys that have been there. Alan Lazard was a 17.8%, and Marquez Valdez-Scanlon was another one at like 14%. These guys are known for that. It kind of makes you question what they're putting in the Gatorade in Green Bay. But, enters this guy, Matthew Gold, who became the first Packers wide receiver selected in the first round since Javon Walker all the way back in 2002. While we aren't exactly looking at can't miss sort of prospect profile, but, a couple guys from the Fantasy Lights experts had plenty of good things to say about it, and I wrote it down because I did agree. I think they both kind of fought each other a little bit here. But so one's saying that Golden would be a wide receiver 3. He said, I do not believe that Matthew Golden will be a superstar in the NFL. I'm not so sure about that. Superstar, okay, but a star, I could do a star. But I think he will be a premium wide receiver 2 on a contender. Someone who will lick single coverage, make plays for you at any sector of the field, and naturally shift between the boundary and slot as needed. And I can agree with that. This guy ran a 4.29. I think he should earn a starting spot sooner rather than later. Inside a room that figures to be missing, Christian Watson with his knee injury for the first 50% of the year at least, maybe more. Although we shouldn't completely count out the other involved parties, right? Jayden Reed somehow only had 75 targets in 17 games last season, despite regularly looking like the offense's best playmaker. The first man without the name Samuel to lead all wide receivers in rushing yards since 2018. Reed is reportedly still very much the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay, despite the addition of 2 top 100 picks at the position. Okay, now we get into Romeo Doubs. Led the league in target share in each of the past 2 seasons, yet only has wide receiver 47 and wide receiver 48 in points per game finishes to show for it. Now, it sure seems like Dobbs' spot in 3 wide receiver sets is safe as the offense's ex-wide receiver. Although expecting bunches of additional targets with the added competition feels like wishful thinking. Okay. Now, Datavion Wicks. Now, he is tied for 4th in what was ESPN's open rating, which is metric meant to help quantify separation, right? But he's dead last in catch rating. The man went from 9th in yards per target, which is 10, and to 85th, 5.5. Okay, in those 2 years. Maybe 2025 will look more like 2023 than the last year, but it sure seems like Golden is coming for his job, right? Bottom line of it is the uncertainty surrounding the target share here has led to all the parties involved really making affordable ADPs, okay? Ultimately, Reed and Golden are the 2 targets here, and both are priced outside of the top 40 options in early drafts. Okay, this wide receiver 4 price tag feels closer to both players' floor than ceiling, and accordingly makes them quality mid-round targets, especially considering the drop-off at the position after the first 50 players are off the board. Okay, we'll get into the tight end position here. Just how high is Tucker Kraft's fantasy ceiling? Okay, I have him at tight end 11. The Packers' 2023 third-round pick worked well behind Luke Musgrave throughout their rookie seasons, but an early season ankle injury kept Musgrave off the field for a larger portion of the 2024 regular season. Okay, this allowed Kraft to run away with the starting job, and at this point, it's hard to imagine Musgrave ever getting it back. After all, he went to South Dakota State, proved to be one of the league's most efficient players at the position. Kraft among 31 tight ends with 50-plus targets in 2024. He ranked in second in yards per target and yards per reception, and number 1 in yards after the catch per reception. Okay, so the yards after the catch figure was really where Kraft made his money, right? Overall, Kraft's 3.1 plus yards after the catch over expectedly easily led all tight ends. Okay. Bottom line here is Kraft still managed to post near full-time route rates regardless of whether Musgrave was able to suit up or not. Okay. The bigger concern is good old-fashioned touchdown regression. Scoring 7 times on 70 targets might be wishful thinking again ahead of 2025, especially with a guy like Matthew Golden. Again, a crowded wide receiver room, but consider Kraft is just 16th in projected targets at the position ahead of 2025. So for this reason, I haven't overly prioritized him in early drafts. Give me the potential triple-digit hogs like Evan Ingram or David Njoku at similar price points, but at the minimum, Kraft is a solid borderline tight end 1 target. So, could Malik Willis get another starting shot at some point in the future? I usually reserve this question for something about the team's offensive line or defense, but I wanted to give some love to the dual-threat backup who performed quite well in 2-spot starts last season after being run off of in Tennessee, right? So consider Willis ranked first in yards per attempt at 10.2 and third in yards per carry, 6.9. Now, if you move the thresholds low enough, small sample size be damned, the man was looking like a poor man's Lamar Jackson out there. Now, a quarterback 22 and a quarterback 6 finish in his first 2 full starts reflect the reality that Willis is capable of supplying some fantasy goodness whenever given the opportunity to play a full game. Now, don't expect a legit competition anytime soon, but just realize that more progression as a passer could eventually lead to a starting chance elsewhere. Something that could be followed by bunches of fantasy points given the dual threat ability at him. So what is the prediction for the Packers in 2025? The Packers' 9.5 win total comes after LaFleur has just won 13, 8, 9, and 11 during his 6 years leading the Packers. Unfortunately, the suddenly lethal NFC North won't offer much relief throughout the year, but man, expecting under double-digit wins for what again looks like one of the conference's more complete teams feels like wishful thinking. Okay, so give me the over on 9.5, and my bold fantasy call is that Jayden Reed solidifies himself as the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay on his way to working as a top 30 wide receiver in points per game this year. Okay. The last team we're going to talk about here, guys, is the Chicago Bears. This one's going to be fun. So, appreciate everybody sticking around. We've got about another 20, 25 minutes to just cover this last team. And then we'll reveal some news that's coming down here at the Marshall Experience. So, jumping into Chicago, last year's Bears were riding high fresh off a second consecutive offseason championship that produced franchise quarterback Caleb Williams, wide receiver Roma Odunze, and wide receiver Keenan Allen. Okay, it sure seemed like these moves were yielding desired results right after Chicago entered the bye with a sterling, which was surprising to me, 4-2 record. Okay, then the Jayden Daniels Hail Mary happened. Then the Bears lost 10 straight games to finish in last place in the NFC North. Okay, that sure escalated quickly, if I do say so myself. While the defense largely continued to put its best foot forward, the offense struggled mightily to get much of anything going more weeks than not last season. Okay, so the Chicago Bears in 2024, they were 28th in points per game, almost dead last in EPA per rush, and the defense was 13th actually in points per game against. Now, enter 2025, and you'll never believe this. But in my opinion, the Bears have won another offseason championship. Lions OC and the wonder kid, Ben Johnson is the new man in charge, right? More playmakers were added to the wide receiver and tight end rooms, and arguably most importantly, a plethora of offensive line upgrades should help improve the PFF's 24th ranked unit last year. Now, this brings us to our questions. Will 2025 be any different for Caleb Williams with Ben Johnson? Okay, I do have Caleb Williams as the quarterback 10. Williams' disappointing rookie campaign was mostly just relative to his generational billing as the number one overall pick in 2024. There were plenty of highs, right, for the former Heisman winner. He's certainly blessed with some special arm talent. He can evade, pass rushers with the best of them, in my opinion. But still, there were too many times when the easy was hard, okay? And negative plays were far too frequent, particularly when it came to avoiding sacks. Only Will Levis at 30% had a higher pressure to sack rate than Williams at 28% in 2024. Now, PFF assigns blame on each sack, and Williams led the league in his own sacks taken at 17, independent of the offensive line's own much publicized issues, okay? So that was basically a big problem was, it's so much sacks. And I kept saying that. It's his ability to extend the plays. They didn't translate very well from college to the NFL. And his offensive line wasn't the greatest. But I think now that it's a lot better, some weeks Williams looked like Superman, and then other weeks it was like, whoa. So will the 2025 be any different? Well, so the scheme. Let's get down to the scheme. Ben Johnson is anyone's idea of a top 5 play caller. Okay. He oversaw the league's highest scoring offense from 2022 to 2024. We're going to talk about him a little bit later. But the offensive line upgrades. Chicago replaced the interior of its offensive line, signing Drew Dahlman, trading for Jonah Jackson, and Chiefs Joe Thuney. PFF graded Tallman and Thuney as top 10 players at their positions last season, while Jackson started 25 games with Ben Johnson during their final 2 years together in Detroit. Okay, so more juice in the passing game. It's not fair to say DJ Moore, Roma Odunze, and Keenan Allen were anything close to a bad wide receiver trio. But it's also hard to deny that the 2025 Bears have managed to make a strength even stronger. The probable departure of free agent Keenan Allen, who turns 33 in April, was met by spending the 39th pick on Luther Burden, who I think will be exciting in Chicago. Additionally, stud Michigan player Colston Loveland, they got with the 10th pick. So the bottom line here is the Bears have turned every stone in an effort to make Williams' second season work far better than the first, right? And you know what? I'm buying it to an extent. We already know Williams' magician act out of structure is translated to some incredible plays, right? An improved environment in the presence of a S-tier play caller should make for that more consistency and hopefully fewer negative plays. Now, I don't love the fact that Williams, quarterback 9, is actually more expensive than he was this time last year. But he's firmly in that low-end quarterback 1 tier, along, the other dual threat guys, much as Justin Fields and Kyler Murray. Now, that said, I would want to place my bet just a bit in redraft formats by also using a later round pick on someone like a JJ McCarthy or a Trevor Lawrence. Okay, AKA cheaper archetypes in the same, this offensive environment could, quite stick kind of mold. Can fantasy managers trust DeAndre Swift as a 0 running back staple? Okay, remember, that's when we focus on other positions, wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends. There exists, there exists this idea that the new Bears head coach Ben Johnson was one of the decision makers behind trading Swift to the Eagles prior to the 2023 season. Even if true, doesn't necessarily mean Johnson hated Swift. If the girl he wound up calling was Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm not going to sit here and say Swift is a great running back. I think that Swift had his time in Philadelphia because he was behind a great offensive line. Anyone who's caught a few of his performances in recent years has seen more of a few examples of poor vision, in my opinion, and his advanced metrics last season were largely all among the league's bottom 10 backs. So with that said, Swift joined Devon Achane in the league's bottom 7 rushers in rushing yards per over expected per carry. Jonathan Taylor and Kyren Williams joined him in the bottom 10 backs in yards after contact per carry. And his tackles avoided per carry mark was only 0.01% worse than a Joe Mixon. Okay, so those running backs that I just named finished as a top 10 producer in points per game anyway. Swift was a running back 21, but because of high-end volume in a hallway, decent offense tends to lead to bunches of fantasy points, even if the efficiency isn't great. Okay, it's the latter point on volume that is the crux for supporting Swift in fantasy land at the moment. The Bears' only addition to the position this offseason was 7th rounder Kyle Munagi. Even the rumored addition, someone like Nick Chubb, which didn't happen, I didn't think would really cut into it, but Nick Chubb ended up going to Houston. Okay. I don't think that Roschon Johnson is that David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't think Roschon is that guy. Again, Swift is not great, but he's also not some sort of Kalan Balaj level of terrible running back and capable of doing a single good thing on the football field. Okay, well, sorry for the stray Balaj. I apologize. Swift had never finished worse than the running back 24 in points per game since entering the league in 2020. He was the running back 16 during his only season with Johnson as the OC. So it's curious that Swift gets cut, seemingly no slack for operating behind the same offensive line that apparently ruined Williams' rookie campaign. So the bottom line is still just 26 years old. Swift has the explosive pass catcher profile we want in fantasy, with real room for upside in an ascending offense. Okay. Now, don't be too quick to hold Swift's 2024 efficiency stats against him if you didn't do it for Barkley, Henry, or Jacobs prior to their bounce back campaigns the season prior. So there's legit running back 1 upside here at a running back 3 price tag. Now, Roschon averaged just 2.7 yards per carry last year on 55 attempts. dead last among 70 running backs in that qualified area. That said, a lot were in short yardage. 36% of those were against stacked boxes, which would have been the highest mark in the league if qualified. Of course, if this backfield could become a lower middle class man's version of Detroit, Johnson could still provide enough goal line excellence and handcuff upside to smash, in my opinion, as the running back 51. Okay, so who will lead this revamped wide receiver room? Now, DJ Moore's first season in Chicago produced career-high marks across the board. Life was good with Justin Fields, right, under center. And as the ex-Panther dived and dodged his way to the 9th most points per game among all wide receivers, that man was the screen fanatic that year. I couldn't imagine. It was like watching Percy Harvin again in the screen game. So, but unfortunately for DJ Moore, his encore campaign wasn't quite as cool, right? Shane Waldron's more gadgety usage didn't help. The chemistry with Williams simply wasn't there. The result was career low efficiency numbers across the board and pre-game counting stats that were far removed from what the Bear fans had seen before 2024. Okay, of course, Moore had plenty of competition in the offense in the form of Rome Odunze and Keenan Allen. The 2024 rookie struggled to live up to the top 10 billing, ranked 11th in yards per route run and 10th in passer rating when targeted among 12 rookie wide receivers with at least 50 targets last year. So, hey, there are some flashes and missed the throws, up the mouth. Wide receiver 59 finish in points per game for Romeo. But, man, we're talking about a campaign that produced just the 39th most points per game among rookie wide receivers over the past 5 years. Now, relatively more Met talent like Gabe Davis, Treylon Burks, and Michael Williams all had more productive debut seasons than Romeo Odunze, who, yes, had plenty of target competition, but also, yes, still did manage to get fed triple-digit pass game opportunities when it was all said and done. Okay, finally, there's the newbie in town, Luther Burden. Luther Burden ran a 4.4 140 at the combine. I think the yards after catch upside is the story here. Burden joins Malik freaking Neighbors, guys, as the only two SEC wide receivers to force at least 30 missed tackles on receptions in a single season over the past 5 years. Think about that. SEC wide receivers. We're talking LSU, Alabama wide receivers. I mean, we're talking about top-tier wide receiver schools. Burden's 0.49 missed tackle force rate is the second highest rank of any Power 5 wide receiver of the last decade. Okay? Bottom line, there should have been subpar vibes surrounding DJ Moore this offseason after some questionable effort through 2024. Then again, the 28-year-old is easily the most proven pass catcher, guys. In an offense, most of us expect to rebound in a big way this year, I think, in my opinion. So his low-end wide receiver 2 price tag isn't too big of an issue considering the proven top 10 upside at hand. I wouldn't say I've gone out of my way to draft more this offseason, but I'm cool with him at the price and would draft him ahead of guys like DK Metcalf or Xavier Worthy. That said, I've been less inclined to pick Odunze at wide receiver 34 ahead of more proven wide receiver 2 options like George Pickens, Jalen Waddle, or high-ceiling wide receiver 1s like Calvin Ridley or Chris Olave, right? So Burden also hasn't exactly been someone I've gone out of my way to select as a top 50 pick. Okay, Keon Coleman and Rashad Bateman are preferred targets for me in that range thanks to their more likely potential to be the number 2 wide receiver in a higher upside passing attacks. Okay, so is Colston Loveland poised for a tight end 1 rookie season? Certainly possible. Here's the hope, and the injury gods help the current shoulder recovery go smoothly. The Bears' senior director of player personnel, Jeff King, came out and said that Loveland should be ready to go for training camp in this month, and that the team would not push his return. So if healthy, we're looking at a potential and rare year 1 difference maker at the position. Okay. One of just 6 tight ends to earn top 10 draft capital since 2000. Loveland's talent profile alone is worth betting on, and there's also plenty of optimism surrounding Ben Johnson's history with Sam Laporta. Again, we talked about earlier about Sam Laporta's rookie year. I could possibly see that being a lot of that from Colston Loveland. Overall, the Lions' rising third-year talent. Now, he did post a tight end 3 and tight end 10 finishes during his first two seasons, while scoring tight end 3 and tight end 8 in points per game. Now, there's just one problem. Cole Kmet is still alive and well. GM Ryan Poles gave him a 4-year, $50 million contract extension in 2023 for a reason. The Bears can't reasonably get out of the contract without a trade before 2026. I'm not implying that Kmet will keep Loveland on the bench. I'm just realized that things could be a lot more split than fantasy managers would prefer. A Dawson Knox caught Dalton Kincaid in Buffalo situation, right? This is reflected in their projections. I think that, Fantasy Life had them at 82 targets, 12th at the position, working ahead, but, not really exactly shutting out Kmet at 37 targets. So that's a lot of targets to take away from somebody. I mean, imagine if Kmet wasn't there and Loveland had an extra 30 targets. He would be at 112 targets his rookie year. That's bonkers. Bottom line is I'm fine betting on the talent of Loveland when looking at the fellow borderline tight ends in the crowded offenses like Kincaid, Brenton Strange, Tyler Warren, and Tucker Kraft. Okay, now that said, his top 10 redraft ADP is a bit too stiff for me at the moment. I prefer the target ceilings of Evan Ingram and David Njoku at that price. But still, the long-term upside for dynasties for Loveland cannot be understated. I've scooped him up as much as possible in Dynasty Land this offseason, and it's definitely going to pay off. What makes Ben Johnson's scheme so great? Well, for one thing, the man loves play action and keeps the opponent off balance at the snap via motion, okay? Overall, Johnson's play action rate in 3 seasons with the Lions was the highest in the league at 5.2. Top 8 marks in pre-snap motion and tricks 7% reflect the reality that there's just a lot for defenses to worry about on any given play, right? So pushing these sorts of easy buttons in the passing games has made all of the more effective thanks to the reality that teams have needed to account for Johnson's explosive run game. The Lions were the NFL's 5th most run-heavy offense last year in drop back rate over expected. And Johnson deserves a lot of credit for essentially becoming the league's top offense in yards per contact per carry. Okay, now this is without the assistance of a high-end dual threat quarterback, which he has a lot better one now. Excuse me, sorry. Of course, it remains to be seen whether Johnson's X's and O's or the Lions' Jimmys and Joes had more to do with the big point, totals in Detroit over the past few years, but we'll find out soon enough, right? So what is the prediction for the Chicago Bears in 2025? I fully understand the bounce back potential of the 2025 Bears. But unfortunately, I think this loaded division is just more proven all the way around. That is more so my argument against the Bears clearing 8.5 wins as opposed to anything necessarily against them. Okay, a positive 3-win boost over last season still wouldn't quite get them there. Give me under 8.5 wins. I think it's going to be about 8, despite a solid offensive improvement. But my bold fantasy call is that DeAndre Swift will emerge as one of the better 0 running back picks by supplying a top 15 finish in points per game this year. That is going to be it for tonight, guys. I appreciate everybody sticking around. That is the NFC North, and you below and have it. On Tuesday, we will be covering the AFC North. Followed by that next Thursday, we will be doing the NFC South. So, guys, I appreciate you sticking around. We're going to give out some news real quick. Here at the Marshall Experience, we talk a lot about a fantasy, but me personally, I've had dreams of my own for since I was a little boy, and coaching has been one of those dreams. Today I got offered a coaching job for the Wisconsin Aviators. In Wisconsin, they are a professional semi-pro football team. I will be the new special teams coordinator. We gotta start somewhere. But it's an opportunity that we could not thank more for, and that we are going to put our full-fledged effort into. But we are very excited about that opportunity and what it could bring to the Sports Lounge media as well as the Marshall Experience. Because on top of that, we are going to be running their media team. So I'm basically going to be making sure the media team's all good to go. We have people in place for a media team to run a website, and then that way I can be on the field doing my other part. So again, we are very excited, and big news over here at the Marshall Experience. But appreciate everybody sticking around. Stay tuned for more on that. We have meetings in the next couple weeks, and we will always put out more information as we get it, and the information that we can. So stay tuned for that. And again, I deeply appreciate everybody sticking around for the more lengthy episodes. It's a blessing in disguise. So again, I appreciate it, guys. Have a good night. Thank you.